Welcome to everyone who's joined us today. I'm Christina Lovelock, and it is my pleasure to host this fantastic panel discussion. The word expert gets used very liberally, but I'm able to use it today without hesitation to describe today's panel. So welcome to Debra Paul, Jim Cadle, and Linda Parker, and also to Charlie Payne, who you can't see but should be with us on the phone. Do you want to give us a hello, Charlie? No, we'll hopefully be able to bring Charlie in shortly. But today we're going to be discussing the question.
I'm unmuted. I am unmuted.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm in.
Welcome.
Hey,
We
good.
can't
You're
see
working.
you, but we can hear you. Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the question, is business analysis still relevant? And there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to pose questions to the panel using the questions function, please, rather than the chat. And so be thinking while you're listening. Today is also a very exciting week for BCS and the BA community, as the eagerly awaited 4th edition of the book Business Analysis is published, and I'm sure we'll have time to hear more about that a little later. But we're going to jump straight in, and I'm going to come to you, Debbie, first. This question, is business analysis still relevant? It's quite a controversial question, and it produces an emotional reaction. So why are we even talking about this? Why do we need to answer this question?
It's interesting because I think it's a good question. And I also think it's a good question to ask if it's a relevant question. So I like both aspects. I think, unfortunately, it is important to ask this question, partly because we work in an industry that changes so much, and we introduce new roles, new techniques, new methods all the time. And the world changes around us, as we all know, with evidence this year. So we have to constantly look at what is relevant given the context that we're working within. The business analyst role seems to be very appreciated in some quarters and maybe very not appreciated in others. And, you know, there are organizations that actually have removed the BA role in the past few years, replaced with a different type of role. And so you've got a spectrum there, and various organizations are at different points along that spectrum. So we can't say that the business analyst role is always relevant and we just have to acknowledge that and move on and make assumptions. We have to question, are we keeping ourselves relevant? Are there new roles coming along that are maybe overlapping? From my perspective, analytical thinking is essential in organizations, absolutely essential. And it's interesting, I was reading an article in one of the national newspapers recently that was talking about a number of projects, government projects, engineering as well as change and transformational projects, where the starting point had not been well done. Various people may think this is what we want, but their version of this can be very different to other people's version of this, and you end up with a muddle. And that's where I think analytical thinking is so vital, and that understanding that we need to understand the context, we need to understand what this and what success looks like from various perspectives. We need to look at options in order to set change programs and projects off on a good path. And then throughout the process, that analytical thinking is also vital because things come up that are complex, that requires somebody to really think about and discuss with other people. And this, to me, is where the business analyst role comes in. But we have got to make sure we keep it relevant. And that means not making assumptions that actually we're always going to do a brilliant job. And as you know, Tina, I love your article on when BAs go bad. And I think that is a warning for all of us to constantly question our relevance and make sure it still continues.
I think that's really interesting. Charlie, if I can just bring you in there, because we've talked previously about for BAs to be relevant, it has to have strong BA skills. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, isn't it? And I'll echo everything that Debbie has just said. And you know, what is not going to go away is the need and the ability for organisations to make informed decisions, to make the right decisions, to get the best business outcomes, to keep going as a business, right? And that's becoming even more important as complexity increases, there's more data available, and making meaningful decisions is not necessarily straightforward. And that's where that BA skill set, I think, the critical thinking, the analytical thinking, the ability to go wide and deep is is a essential place to be in, and a skill which I know in our organisation is really coveted right now. You know, so is business analysis relevant? Well, I hope so. We're looking to hire new roles, and I hope that our business cases for those roles are justified as well. But as you kind of say, Christina, what's really key is we're not talking about an order taker role here, right? We're not talking about someone who comes in and just takes notes and writes things up and thinks that that's sufficient. Right, we're talking about truly knowing your business, the environment it operates within, the ability to question, to clarify, to challenge provocatively at certain points, to be a critical friend as needed to be. So you've got the conscience of the organisation at hand at all times, so that you're there saying, I'm not sure, how does that work with this, or how does that hold together? I don't see, because that skill set is what then people turn around and say, I'm really glad we've got this person on this piece of work. It's not necessarily calling you to BA, or it doesn't matter what the job title is, but your function and skill set as BAs is that critical thinking and that analytical capability. And that's not going away. It's increasing, and we have to have our voice and show that value. I'll go on, but I'll stop there.
I think we'll come back to that question about job titles, because that's really interesting. But first, I want to explore something which has been mentioned as a question, which is around data. So organisations are investing heavily in big data and data analytics. So how do BAs still relevant in that environment? And are data scientists perhaps going to replace the BA role? Jim, can I ask you to share your thoughts on that one?
Yes. Interesting. I'm just picking up on what Debbie and Charlie have said. If you think of the origin of the BA role, it kind of grew out of there were systems analysts once, but their view wasn't holistic enough, yeah? Or that was what it was thought. And it seems to me there's a little bit of a danger at the moment. We're going back in the other direction. In other words, yes, data scientists have a clear role to play, but still we need somebody to look at the whole big picture for the organization and say, what is it that we want to know? What is it that matters to us about the organization? What direction are we going in strategically in future? And so where does our data analytical need comes from? What do we want to do? So I don't think the roles replace each other. They complement each other, like all the other roles, I think. But I think it's quite important that people understand the interrelationships between them.
And Linda, you presented at the conference BA Europe last year. The topic was No BA is an Island. Could you talk a little bit more about those different roles and our space as BAs?
Yeah, I think as we've moved into this more integrated environment where we work in smaller teams and everyone works at close quarters, there's a lot more roles that have sprung up over that period. You now have user experience people, you have user researchers, you have content writers now. You also have the old teams with technical architects and developers. And because you work at close quarters, they all want to get in on the act of the environments that BAs would traditionally have done themselves. And I think BAs is sort of touching a bit on what Debbie said earlier. You need to sort of grow with that kind of team environment and work with them and not be afraid to invite them into your space. And that's what this presentation was all about. It was called No BA is an Island. And that's because we've never worked on our own. We've always played nice with other BAs. We've always played nice with other people. But don't be afraid when you're growing and moving forward and being relevant in today's world. Don't be afraid to invite these people in. You work brilliantly. BAs and UX and user researchers, they work brilliantly together because the UX people, they really tap into how your users feel and the behavioural side of it while you're looking at the needs and analysing the needs, and they dovetail beautifully together. And it really comes as a really great package. You can bounce ideas off each other. So don't be afraid of opening up. It's the way to go forward. And the BA also can take charge of that group and really be the linchpin, but also the leader of that little group of people to drive them forward. It's not a management kind of thing, but it's because we're natural kind of leaders in that kind of little community because of the core skills we have to building rapport and and communicating and looking after people, being that little kind of agony aunt sometimes, or agony uncle. You sort of naturally, people graduate towards you, so you can look after these people and be the natural leader for this little group of people. It's a natural role for us, I think.
Thanks for that, Linda. And you mentioned quite a few different roles there. We've talked about data already, but also UX, for example. Do you think BAs need to expand our skill sets? Debbie, maybe do you want to talk about that? Where do we need to expand our skills to stay relevant?
I think we need to continuously expand our skills. And that doesn't mean that we then encompass other roles, but it does mean that we can communicate better with other people, as well as working more effectively as part of the team, as Linda said. I mean, just to pick up on, sorry to go backwards, but the data scientist role, I think that is a really interesting one, because if you think about it, you have a spectrum, I always think, with data, from analysing, modelling, capturing and recording through to analytics of results. And data science works towards the back end of that spectrum primarily. We should work towards the front end of that spectrum. And I was very fortunate, because when I was first an analyst, I was trained in sort of data-driven analysis. And so to me, data is a very natural thing. But I would say as business analysis grew, the focus on data diminished, which was such a shame. And a lot of business analysts weren't so comfortable. Well, if you're not comfortable with data, collaborating with data scientists and understanding the data and that data spectrum is going to be much, much more difficult. Similarly with UX, I was also very fortunate that I did a lot of work in the business change area when I first went into analysis, and understanding user roles and different types of characteristics of users was actually part of my job. So having that background and then working with people who are now in the user researcher role, again, is quite a nice natural fit, because you end up with an understanding of that different perspective, but you can see how the perspective ties with yours. So I think we do have to constantly build on our skills, engage with different techniques and tools so that we can work better and more collaboratively with colleagues in these much more specialist roles, whilst also respecting the fact that we all have our specialisms. And I think professional respect between the specialisms is very, very important.
I totally agree, and that professional respect needs to go both ways. So there's a question that's been posed to us around how do we sell business analysis, and how do we earn that professional respect? Does anybody want to pick up on that thread? Charlie.
Yep, I've been unmuted. I can talk again. So in my experience is it's actually so much about you as a person, right? Not your job title. It's how are you as a person in a role in an organization helping that organization get to value, right, quickest, right? And people, you know, the role I've taken on now, I'm no longer under the BA job title. I'm working a UK-wide role in helping to make our organization and solution development streamlined and efficient as possible. But I'm sitting with our ITLT regularly, and I'm just like, well, I'm a BA here because I'm just asking all the questions to draw this together, and everyone's skipping to the solutions, and I'm playing the common sense role, right, and able to unpick it. And I don't think I'm doing anything differently than what I did as a BA, just slightly different outputs and how it looks. And here's the value, right? People look at me and say, this guy is helping us make meaningful decisions. This guy understands our problem space, or the opportunities, and it helps to draw it together, tell the story concisely to bring meaningful life to it, right? And they look at that as me as a person. So how do I sell that? That's who I am. I'm analytically driven by data to make right informed decisions. It's in my DNA. And that's why the role that I perform, wherever it is, that an organization desires. And that's my encouragement to people listening in, is to say, what are you offering? You know, we had a mission statement when I managed our BA team. It was, we are about value-focused analysis for the right business outcomes, right? Value-focused analysis for the right business outcomes. Do you know the business outcomes the organization needs? Do you know what type of analysis is required? And are you sure it's of value? Because if it's not of those three things, don't bother. Right? If you get after those three things, you will find that your role and the benefits you bring it is highly sought after.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm just going to give Debbie the right to reply on that, because it's some of your top words there, Debbie: value and role. So you might be on mute.
Sorry, I put myself on mute there just in case there was any feedback. Yes, I mean, Tina knows that the word value is something that I really like to be very careful about, although I have to say I thought Charlie used it absolutely fine there, just because I think one of the things that sometimes people in our profession, in our industry, talk about is delivering value, and we can't, but we can co-create it. By doing all the things that we've all been talking about here, is working collaboratively to understand what value looks like for another role or another part of the organisation, and working with that to help them actually achieve that value. So yes, so thank you for that, Tina. And the thing about the role is, I do think that sometimes business analysts can exist in a bit of a bubble, and we talk to each other, and I talk to all these fantastic people like you guys on the panel, and we discuss things, and really there's a lot of clarity there. But unfortunately, it doesn't appear that is always the case. And sometimes, if we really want to sell what we do, we have to stand in our customers' shoes and look at their voice and say, how well are they understanding what we're talking about? And are we being clear about what we can offer them? Are we making false promises, like if you employ us, we will deliver value for you, because that can really cause a lot of problems. But are we using terminology and language that they understand, that they will then be able to tap into and say, yes, that's what I want?
Thanks, Debbie. Linda, can I ask you to come in on this question of perception and reputation? How do you think other professions perceive the BA profession from your point of view?
I think sometimes we're perceived as slow, and that we slow down the pace of change and the pace of development. I think that's sometimes correct, sometimes incorrect. I think when we're living in a world where there's constant rapid development, like through sort of agile technology or iterative change, and the way that we work now, I mean, it's not new, it's been around for a long time now, but we sort of sometimes seem to slow that down a bit. I think that's a false accusation, because you need to slow down to speed up. That's always been my experience. You need to be able to look at the whole picture to understand what's going on in that picture, and if you can slow it down enough, you can then understand what's going on, and that speeds things up. If you've ever worked in an agile team anyway and studied flow, then you can only work as fast as the slowest moving column on your Scrum board. So flow is an interesting thing. You know, slowing things down to speed things up so you can look at the picture and understand where you're going is a key factor. But the way we can speed things up is to work together with our team and to understand how you break down information and to know where you're going. You can't start a journey without understanding where that journey is going to end to some degree. So I think that's one perception that's out there. I was going to also go back on something that Debbie and Charlie both said about whether we're recognising the community, and I think BAs are also a little bit at fault here in that we don't shout about what we do. Now, whether that's through sometimes laziness, maybe that's the wrong word, but we kind of keep it a bit a secret about what we do. We're good at what we do. We're out there, we're doing things, and sometimes it'll be, I really liked what that person did. Charlie did a great job. Linda did a great job at doing that. What's their role? Who are they? And so we don't really promote the role as such. We promote ourselves maybe, but not the role. And then, you know, if we're not going to promote the role, then how can we get the role out there? How can we get recognised? How can we get perceived for doing a good job, or people understanding that it's the role and the training that is behind the role that is giving us the ability to do a good job. And I think BAs become their own worst enemy because we're not good at promoting that role. We do it great at conferences and at forums, but not in our own businesses and in the community as a whole.
I think that's a really good point, Linda, and it links to a question that we've got in the from the audience, which I'm going to ask you to pick up on, Jim, which is how can we, as BAs, be top of our game in these challenging times? So how can we help our businesses and organisations recognise what we've got to offer?
Okay, well, something I've been going on about for years is the fact that I think sometimes BAs are in a prison of their own making. In other words, because they've got too restrictive a view of their own role, you know, they think, oh, as Charlie's point about being order takers, you know, I toddle along and with my notebook and I write down what people want. Well, really? No, I think actually, one of the concepts we've built up a bit in the new version of the book, or Debbie has actually, is this idea of the T-shaped professional. And I think BAs have to both improve themselves in terms of the depth of what they can do, but also the breadth, so that they can engage with more people. And the more skills you've got and the more knowledge of other fields you've got, the better you are able to engage with those other professionals and say, oh, okay, what we really need to bring in at this point is a data scientist or a UX specialist or whatever, yeah? And thereby demonstrate the value. But as I say, they've got to break out of a box imposed by themselves. I've often said to people on training courses where they say, oh, of course, my organisation doesn't want me to do that. It just wants me to gather requirements. And I say, well, what's the worst that can happen to you if, for example, you go back to the business and say, are you sure we're doing the right thing here? You know, let alone whether we're doing it right. Are we doing the right thing? The worst thing that can happen to you is they tell you to get back in your box. You know, it's probably not career limiting or something, but actually it might be very much more the reverse, where people say, hey, this guy, this girl, they're really adding value here because I hadn't thought of that, you know?
So there's something about a willingness to take risks there, isn't there, to put yourself out there. And something, Debbie, you and I have talked about in the past is using a workshop to crack every nut is the phrase that I've used in the past. How does using the kind of full range of BA tools and techniques help us, do you think?
I think it's really important. Our toolkit is phenomenal. And as anybody who knows me will tell you, I'm terrible for just saying, I know a really good model for that. I was actually talking to one of my family who is a solicitor, does not work in business analysis at all at the weekend. And we were talking about something and I said, of course, if we look at Adair's team task individual model, that's really going to help us in this situation. And she said, gosh, there's always a model or a technique. And I said, but there are so many in the business analysis toolkit. And actually, when you think about it, in organizations, every situation is different. It's all got its different ambiguities, its different needs, all sorts of different people, so many different aspects to cater for. If all you do is roll out the one technique or the one or two techniques every single time, you're staying inside your comfort zone. You're missing an opportunity to give yourself the opportunity to find additional insights. And also coming back to something Linda said, you're missing an opportunity to show how important analytical thinking and using analytical techniques can be. So I said to you the other day, Tina, that my colleague Lawrence and I were talking about the rusty toolkit of business analysis. And the idea was that there's this great toolkit, but at the bottom there's all sorts of tools that people are not delving into because new shiny toys come along, and that seems to be the way to do everything. And actually, I do see that, and I think it's such a shame because some of those rusty tools absolutely are phenomenal. And actually, sometimes some of the newer tools coming along are adaptations of some of those tools, and sometimes they've lost something slightly. So, you know, we do need to really think about deploying all of the tools in our armory and understanding when they can be really useful, because that's what will give us, that's what gives us a profession, really, isn't it? You know, to come back to something that Charlie said, if all we do is order take or run a workshop, that's not really a profession.
I think you made a really good point, Debra, that it's the analytical thinking. Sometimes we produce things and we show them to our stakeholders and go, ta-da, and BAs don't get the reaction that they expect, because I think we have to demonstrate what that enables. So does that enable a decision? Does that enable an improvement? Does that surface a risk that was not known previously? It's not about the deliverables that we produce, it's the thinking and the decision making that the use of those techniques then enables. So what I'm going to do now is, we've had quite a lot of questions come in. I'm going to go through as many of these as I possibly can in the time that we have remaining. Some of these are really big questions and would require a webinar all on their own, so bear that in mind. So one of the questions, it kind of relates to what we were saying about different roles, and it's particularly highlighting the role of the business architect. The question from Matt: do you see the difference between business architecture and business analysis? Is there a question there about level of detail, perhaps? Does anybody want to pick up that point? You're on mute, Debbie.
Pick it up, but I am aware that I've just done the last one, but I'm happy to pick it up and start it off if you like.
Great.
I don't think it's the same thing, but I do think there is a massive area of collaboration between the two. So some of the techniques and artifacts in the business architecture toolkit, really we need to understand as business analysts. So if we take, for example, capability mapping, as an analyst, if there is a proposed change or is an issue or there's an opportunity or something like that, understanding what the architects are showing us in terms of capability is really, really important, because it helps us know what we can leverage. And it also helps us understand where there are gaps. And then we can work with the architects who understand the capability in a lot of detail, understand all the different aspects of capability, because capability is not just somebody with skill. There are so many other different aspects to capability. So if the business architects really understand that, and we understand what the issues and the problems and the opportunities are, then we know where we can come together to work out how we can leverage what we've got, how we can identify where the gaps are, and then how we can find out a way forward to plug those gaps and put what is needed in place. And then that ties back into the business architect updating their view of the capability, and also being able to ensure that what is being proposed will actually do what it is intended to do within that capability context. So that's just one example of where I think they come together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Debbie. And I think business architecture can be a valid career path for BAs. It's not the only one, but it is a relevant one. So we've got another question here, which is a kind of age-old favourite question, really. Sunny Kumar asks, what about domain expertise? How does that help us to stay relevant? Does that help us to stay relevant? Perhaps Linda or Charlie, perhaps you want to say something about that from your areas of domain expertise.
Linda, you go first.
We can't hear you, Linda.
Just asking Charlie if you wanted to go first, but I'll fire away. I'm a bit sort of mixed on domain expertise, because in the past I would have said, actually I'm a contractor, so you know, when I want to go in for a role, I'm like, you don't really need domain expertise, because if you're a good BA, part of what your role is to find out about what's going on, so you can go in with the techniques, you can find out what is going on in this business area, and it affords you the ability to ask the right questions and to get in there and really understand what's going on in this area of the business. But also to go in there without any bias, so you can't make assumptions. You've got to find out what is going on in here. But then I'm sort of in a role now where, after being in there for a long time, actually having that domain knowledge and that expertise has been truly vitally important. And the more knowledge I've gained in that business area, because it's quite complex, and the intricacies of the stakeholders and how they all tie together has been like no other that I've worked in. So having that domain expert expertise has been vital. So personally, I'm kind of on the fence. In past life, I've sort of felt actually it's pretty good. I've learned a lot because I've had a bit of experience in lots of different business areas, so I can go into an area where I've got very little knowledge, but in some areas, really specialist areas, you really need to know what you're talking about.
But everyone has to start somewhere, don't they, on that journey of
Yeah.
developing business knowledge and domain knowledge. Charlie, what's your thoughts on that? Are you on mute? We still can't hear you. I'm going to give Charlie.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Domain
I
expert.
I love this question. Yeah, I love this question. So I wrote down, know enough, use it wisely. Know enough, use it wisely. Some of my BAs, used to be my team, they probably know the business better than most people in the business, right? And that's a great skill to have. I tell them frequently, be very smart in how you use that knowledge. Because if you are too much of the expert, you might be able to get to the answer quicker. That's right, and it's good. But really, for adoption of change, the user needs to be the one that owns it, right? So actually, your domain knowledge, I would use it to ask good questions to the actual SMEs within the business to help to draw out them, because it's engaging them in that change and taking ownership of it. Everyone's have to live with it and use it, whatever the product is. So have enough knowledge, and if you do find yourself very knowledgeable, because that's what happens, you stay in an area and it's great, use it sparingly, use it wisely. And you know, the more of an expert you become in life, it usually leads to kind of the ability to lose the ability to ask stupid questions. And great BAs always ask stupid questions. So don't ever lose that ability, no matter how much of an expert you become.
That's really great. Thank you, Charlie. We've had a question about service design, which I think might be of interest for you, Debbie. It says service design doesn't go into the quantitative side nearly as much, having originated in visual design and marketing. Not sure what you want to make of that question, or whether you want to talk about service more broadly.
It's a really interesting question, actually, because it's so often that people think that service design originated in service management, and actually I agree, it is from the world of marketing, and it's understanding the nature of service, and it's distinguishing it from services, which is quite a subtle distinction sometimes. But if you think of service in terms of what do I as an individual want to feel and experience from this, and how can I work with this to utilize it so that I achieve value, that's the nature of service. So if we're looking at service design, the first thing we have to understand is actually what the service concept means. And quite often we don't. And we need to understand it in quite a big way, okay? Sometimes service science, which is an abbreviation of the area of theory, which also covers engineering and design, sometimes it is actually called the theory of value, interestingly enough. So it sort of taps into that whole area of where does value come from and how is value realized and co-created. So if you think of service design, you are thinking of an end-to-end. You're thinking of an understanding of what service do we as a team, as an organization, as an individual even, want to offer in terms of a value proposition to this customer, and what experience do we want that customer to gain from it, okay? Now you can see where business analysis ties in with that, I hope, because actually we offer an internal service, and the book that you and I wrote, Tina, was all about that internal service of the BA service. But equally, we've got this other level because our internal service is enabling our internal customer to deliver an external service. And so you've got quite a chain there. And so what we have to do is we have to understand and design our internal service in order to help our internal customers understand and design their external service. And you are getting into things there where you might model something like a value stream. Okay, so a value stream might set out a high level overview of a service design, and it might then give you the basis for understanding what the value proposition is, who the customers are, and there are so many different types of customers, and then within each type you then might have different personas and what their experience expectations are, so that it then ties together. It's a huge subject. I think it's actually an area that business analysts would be well advised to look at, though, because this concept of understanding service and taking the business from analysis through to design is actually something that is becoming more and more talked about and prevalent.
And I feel that it really plays very well into the question that we've asked today, is business analysis still relevant? I think to stay relevant, we need to understand the services that we are offering and that there is demand for from our customers. I think that's a really useful way to look at it. We've had another question here, kind of back to roles, about why is there still confusion between business analysis and business analytics? Anybody feel like answering that? So I can see that person feels a bit frustrated.
I mean, I can answer it if you want, but again, I'm where I'm talking all the time. I think there's confusion because we don't have clarity, because the opposite to clarity is ambiguity. And I think a lot of people use the word analytics thinking that they're saying analysis. And I actually have that conversation all the time with people. And I've had the conversation with even people in recruitment where they say, I'm looking for a data analytics specialist. Then I say, what do you want them to do? And actually they want a data analyst. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to start using these terms and other terms as well, clearly and advisedly, and actually, commenting and clarifying where they're not used clearly, because there is a lot of confusion. And one way to overcome that confusion would be actually to define some of these roles clearly in terms of the service that they offer and the value proposition they offer.
That's really useful. Thank you, Debbie. And that leads on to another question, which is one of my favourites from Srimoni, which is, does it matter which area BA is recruited into within an organisation? i.e. they can sit in IT, or they can sit in the business or business change. That's one of my favourite questions to consider. Who would like to talk about that? Linda, I'm guessing as a contractor you sat in various different places throughout organisations.
Personally, I don't think it does. I think as long as you're doing the role that you've been recruited to do as a business analyst, then you can sit in any area. I think that people fall into the trap too much of thinking that a business analyst the work that they're doing leads directly to a technical solution. We don't always end up with technical solutions from the business analysis work that we do. You might be working purely for you might be working at a more strategic level, performing some tasks that are at a strategic level. You might be working in a business environment purely improving their business processes. You might never result in a technical solution or a piece of software. It might be purely at the business end. You might have been brought into a business area to just do some business process improvement. So I don't think it matters which area you come into. The key things are performing your role to the best of your abilities, using the techniques that you know and love, bringing people together and coordinating with other people and bouncing ideas off of them. It's the same skills that you're using all the time. It's just in a different environment.
I think that's interesting. I think it can affect how people see themselves and their level of influence, for example, depending on where they're sat in an organisation. So I think you're right, Linda, it doesn't have to influence, but it sometimes does. And that leads on to a kind of related question, which is from Kevin, about the relationship between business analysts, business architects, enterprise architects, and solution architects. I think that's really interesting that architecture has kind of gone down a route of spelling out these different levels in a way that business analysis doesn't really have. So who would like to talk about that? Go on, Debbie. I can see that you want to say something on that one.
No, but I'm waiting for the others. I mean, I can say something about it, because I do think you're absolutely right, Tina. The architecture world really seems to understand the different focuses. You know, so if you look at solution architecture, which actually is great, isn't it? Because don't you think the name of that role sort of tells you what it's about? Which I think is something we should all aspire to, whichever our job role is to have a role name that does what it says on the tin. And what I like about that is actually the word solution. So it's not software architecture, which again is very nice and neat, and you know what it says on the tin. It's solution architecture. And if you think the question we were talking about originally on this webinar was about business analysis engaging with digital technologies, say, and other developments, actually you can see how solution architecture has to work closely with business analysis to understand, you know, what the options that were considered, what the outcomes that are wanted are, what the requirements are at whatever level, and then ensure that the solution encompasses all of the holistic elements that we look at and uses all of the different aspects, whether it is pulling in digital technologies, whether it is automating process, or whether it's just redefining process to make sure the solution all comes together. So I think, you know, the architecture world really understands, I think, clearly the different roles better than we do, although I do think the term business architect isn't as clearly defined to the outside world, if you like, as solution architect is. But you know, the reason you've got these different levels of architecture is because actually they are focused on very clearly distinct services. And maybe business analysis, because it has become such a broad landscape, maybe that does need to break into a few distinct areas a bit more specifically in order to map that. But I personally think that the architecture world actually has it right in that, you know, you've got a very clear focus from these roles, and you can understand what it is they're attempting to do.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. Questions are still coming in. I don't think we're going to get to the rest of them. And in fact, people are already now saying, can we have a future webinar on X, Y, and Z? So we'll explore some of those other topics. I just want to kind of finally bring this to a close by asking, so if we've hopefully demonstrated today that business analysis is still relevant, how can it remain relevant? Who wants to pick up on that thread?
Go on, James.
Okay. Well, my view is it comes back to something we've covered a few times here, which is that business analysts themselves can't sit pat. You know, you can't actually say, I am a business analyst and I do stuff, you know. You've got to constantly think, well, how do I expand the role? How do I understand more other things that are happening out there? How do I interact with other developing professions, you know, like the architects and so on, so that it's up to us to remain relevant, I think. You know, if we don't develop, like most things in evolutionary terms, you become extinct. So, you know, it's the more adaptable animals that survive, isn't it? And it's the more adaptable professions that survive. So analysts will have to continue to behave differently to match the changes in the business climate.
Thank you. Charlie, you wanted to say something on that. How do we remain relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. You just can't sit on your hands, can you? You know, just as a business shouldn't sit on its hands and think it's it's comfortable. You know, disrupt or be disrupted, and that applies to our profession. Really, it keeps going back to, for me, I always just tell the team, guys, what business outcomes are we trying to get at here? Are you really focused on that goal? Are you really helping? Because the need to get to market, the need to make the changes and at pace is only increasing, and the cost of doing it wrong is even more prevalent right now, right? You know, in terms of, you see big delays because we've not understood the problem space soon enough or well enough, and we've committed, and we, you know, all the kind of psychology comes into play why you can't turn back. And therefore, you know, to remain relevant as BAs, we've got to be loud, right? Very loud as a profession, and in terms of making sure we stay on the track to getting the benefits, enabling the benefits for the organisations to adapt and thrive. So that's yeah, killer role, right? Just killer role, and just keep being loud in terms of the pursuit for doing what is needed for your organisation.
Okay, so I think all that's left for me to say really is that we mentioned the book a few times, which is the Business Analysis 4th edition, written by Debra and James with contributions from several others. It is out this week, and there are discounts available to pre-order, 25% discount available on pre-order. The link is in the questions, and I think it's also going to be posted in the chat as well by Charles. If you want to know more about a lot of the topics that we've covered today, many of them are covered in the book, and hopefully we will have further opportunity to talk about all of these topics. As we said, we could have gone all day. So thank you so much to the panel for all of your contributions. Thank you so much for BCS for putting this together. And thank you to everybody who joined us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.